I'm Jeremy Hobson. This is a special edition of The Middle. And now that we are firmly in the middle of summer, we're going to take a break from the news with an emphasis on the word break. Have you ever taken a sabbatical or thought about taking one? Maybe 6 weeks, maybe 6 months, maybe a year. What would you do with that time? Now, it's not the most American thing. You're probably much more likely to find someone in Europe taking an extended break from work, but it is becoming more common as more and more companies see a benefit in giving their employees sabbatical time. DJ DiDonna is a senior lecturer at Harvard Business School. He's written all about this in a new book out today. It's called Big Time Off, The Transformative Power of Sabbaticals and How to Take One. And he joins us now. DJ, it's great to have you on.
Great to be here in the middle.
Well, and I grew up in academia in the middle of the country. My parents were both teaching at the University of Illinois. They had sabbaticals, but how common are they right now in America?
They're growing more and more. And so, I think, listen, the term sabbatical obviously comes from academia. It has roots in kind of religion and this concept of Sabbath and rest. They're coming into play in the economy in different ways. And so it's companies that are seeking to retain talent, companies that are trying to build loyalty around their employees, and kind of forward-thinking companies that realize that folks need a way to invest in themselves as whole people as opposed to just production machines.
Well, explain that. How do you invest in yourself by taking time off? What are you supposed to do with that time?
Working backwards from how companies think about it, especially the younger generations talk about purpose and meaning and mission and flexibility. They value them more than compensation, right? And, most companies can't, unfortunately, offer an incredibly thrilling or attractive purpose to a lot of its employees. And so it's a way to give people time with which they can do whatever they want, whatever gives them purpose and meaning. When we have extended time and we have time wealth as opposed to this time scarcity we have with the number of vacation days we take, you can run experiments. You can actually heal and step away in ways that, we've all had that experience at the end of the vacation where you say, I'm just now starting to feel relaxed, and then you have to go right back into it. So, imagine having weeks or months off, which for most folks, they've never experienced. And before I had taken mine, I had never experienced either. So it is definitely not the predominant American work story.
How long is your typical sabbatical these days?
I think the best sabbatical should be measured in months, not days or weeks. I encourage folks to take at least 2 months because that'll enable you to get out of your head and into your body and kind of detox a bit. It also, especially if you're coming back to your job, it's long enough that the company has to have someone else do the things that you left behind. Like parental leave. You're gone long enough that the company has to get the things done, which means that you're not running this program in the back of your head around, I know that I'm on vacation, but I can just sense the pile of work that's greeting me upon my arrival. So longer than you've probably ever taken, long enough to run experiments and properly heal.
You want to know that the things that you would be worried about at work are being taken care of even without you doing them, so that there's no responsibility on you to get those things done.
It just allows you an extra set of freedom to say, to divorce yourself from the roles and responsibilities you play at work, not being governed by your calendar or your inbox. For a lot of folks, myself included, it's almost impossible to think about what you would do with a large stretch of time without thinking of the consequences that you would leave behind at work or your other responsibilities.
Now, I mentioned that it doesn't seem like the most American thing, that maybe we're more workaholic in this country than other places. But do people find it hard to take sabbaticals even when they're offered one?
It's a good question. There is this work devotion norm where, if your boss doesn't take the time off, then you feel less likely to be able to take it. Another uniquely American thing is that the highest income earners leave more vacation days on the table unused than in any other country, right? And so we struggle with time off. But the reason I wrote the book and in doing the research was I find these stories that are not maybe the common headlining stories. Steve Jobs took a forced sabbatical from Apple, learned calligraphy, meditated, You have Benioff, who started Salesforce, took a sabbatical from Oracle. And so there are actually these stories where people took time off and it made them, better and had a transformational experience on their jobs and their life.
Because of something that wasn't necessarily related to their job. I mean, you mentioned calligraphy. It's like you're using a different part of your brain and exercising it.
Exactly. It's these things that in our research, folks kept talking about and made them feel more human. I don't think a lot of people set out to become more human on sabbatical. It's not a thing that we feel deficient around, but the types of things folks are doing with their time off, getting rest, doing creative aspects, getting into nature, spending time with family, are things that we know are important, but rarely feel urgent. And so then we just keep investing in the urgency around work and all the things that are front and center.
Mm-hmm. You write that the best predictor of someone's likelihood to take a sabbatical is whether or not they knew someone who had taken a sabbatical. Explain that.
So, 2/3 of sabbaticals are catalyzed by negative events. Like the most of the time we're waiting until it's too late, where a relationship crisis or a job crisis or a health crisis, either ours or someone close to us, kind of pulls us out of the soup so that we can, take care of those things or heal. Mm-hmm. But the way that we want things to work is that folks are looking at someone around them who they can identify with, who have taken this, uncertain and courageous act of leaving work for a while, so that they feel like they have permission to do so. So we want sabbaticals to be something that are like an oil change or a teeth cleaning that just happen, various times over the course of your life. 6 months over the course of a 40 or 50-year career is a rounding error. It's 1% of your working time. And so in order to do that, you need to have examples of people in your life or the predominant story of work that gives you that permission.
Well, and you would probably want to be paid during that time. Is that typical, to be paid while you're taking a sabbatical?
Yeah, ideally. Listen, that is the world that we're working towards. I think about it like the journey for paid parental leave. We're the only OECD country in the world that doesn't have government-mandated paid parental leave. But in the past 40 years, we've made tremendous progress. And so 2002, I think California was the first state to offer it, and now over 40 states do. And so, I think at the very minimum, folks want to have benefits and the guarantee that their job will greet them upon return. But what that ends up doing is it makes sabbaticals not equitable, right? So it's already a bit of a privilege to be able to have the savings to take time off. You want to be able to set up a policy that makes it equitable for folks. Places like Australia, you have long service leave, which gives every civil servant a 6-month break, right? And that was born from the amount of time it took to sail from the UK to Australia as a civil servant. And so you introduce those policies, it becomes just part of the fabric of the society as opposed to some huge exception. And that's what we're working towards.
You mentioned that a lot of sabbaticals end up being forced by events, and maybe those events are not so good. I was just speaking with a recent retiree who said that she wanted to, now with her husband, who's also just freshly retired, wanted to go somewhere like a big trip every quarter and go somewhere every month, because they felt that right now they were in the go-go period of their retirement, which is like, let's just do things because we know we can do it right now. Then there will at some point be the slow go period of the retirement, because maybe the aging parents or some family member requires something, and so it's not they can't do as much. And then the no go period when they themselves are unable to travel like they want to. But right. Yeah, it's not always our choice to do something like this. But what does a forced sabbatical look like? Is that going to be as good for the mind and the body as one where you actually make the choice to do it at that moment?
Well, on that story you just told, I think that they're lucky because in addition to having these examples or exemplars, they call it in the research, of positive ways that people have taken a sabbatical, a lot of people use the examples of folks who regret they had not taken one. Mm-hmm. So you save up your entire career planning on traveling in retirement, and the odds that either you or your partner are both physically well enough and mentally well enough to do the types of things you want to do is not high, right? And so pushing all those dreams and desires to retirement is not a smart bet, as opposed to bringing forward some of them, sprinkling some of your retirement kind of earlier. So that's how I think about that approach. And really what we're trying to do is prevent people from delaying, because, as you said, the catalyzation, think about someone hitting rock bottom as an addict. Like, you often need some sort of sign that the way you are living and working is not working for you. In my book, I talk about this concept of functional workaholism. So we hear a lot about burnout, and I think burnout is an end state where you can no longer continue. Functional workaholism is more the way that a lot of us are working, which everything seems on the surface to be working fairly well. We're performing moderately well, very well at our jobs. But only when we step back away do we see, oh, I had a problem there. We had people in the research that had stomach ulcers, trigger fingers, eczema, and their doctors would say this is stress related. But not until they step away for long enough to truly get out of that work identity do those symptoms kind of start disappearing. And it's just really hard to recognize that when you're in the thick of it.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I found so interesting in your book was you talk about the different types of people who take sabbaticals, and one of them is the achiever, somebody who feels like they have to get something done. There has to be an end goal during the sabbatical, otherwise it's not worth it. Is that the wrong approach then, if you could go in thinking, well, during this time I want to write my book or something like that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think sabbatical land is a big tent. I want to welcome everyone into it, regardless of your motivations. But I do think it's the most natural way to enter, where you have all of these things in your life that you want to do, that are important to you, that you would regret not doing at the end of your life. And so when you have the time and the vacuum of responsibilities, you swap out your kind of work to-do list with your kind of personal bucket list. So that makes sense. That's how I approached it as well. I think the challenge is taking a beat or two to actually heal and recover. Because oftentimes we're running on adrenaline from the last kind of chapter, the last leg of our journey, and we're not giving ourselves a chance to congratulate ourselves for getting there, making space for this time off before you dive into these other kind of achievement things. But one interesting thing our research turned up is that we think of a way to heal, like on a vacation where you sit on a beach and sip a coconut or something. We actually found this concept of active rest, where a lot of tasks that might look like a job to other people, like I remodeled my kitchen myself, does not sound like fun to most folks, but it felt empowering for me to swap out my kind of, Microsoft Excel fingers for swinging a tool. Mm-hmm. And so if it's intrinsically motivated, whether it's writing a book, remodeling your kitchen, getting a certification like pilot's license or scuba diving, that ends up kind of restoring and helping to recover you. So you might be your own worst enemy, but it ends up helping you. And the idea is that you just want to build in a little bit more time for rest.
All right, well, stand by. We're going to take a quick sabbatical from this conversation. The book is called Big Time Off, The Transformative Power of Sabbaticals and How to Take One. I'll be right back with more with DJ DiDonna.
Most of us are one good deal away from finally replacing that worn-out rug, fixing up the backyard, or getting the bedroom we actually want. Good news, that deal's almost here. Wayfair's Black Friday and July sale. Get up to 80% off area rugs and up to 60% off outdoor and bedroom furniture. Shop Wayfair's huge selection of styles and find the piece to fit your style, budget, and space. Plus, free shipping. Black Friday in July ends July 27th. Shop today at wayfair.com.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
Welcome back to a special edition of The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson. I'm joined by DJ DiDonna. His new book is called Big Time Off, The Transformative Power of Sabbaticals and How to Take One. He's a senior lecturer at Harvard Business School. DJ, what made you want to spend time focusing on this topic and writing a book about it?
I certainly didn't anticipate this becoming my identity, which if you Google my name, it's all sabbaticals. I mean, I'd worked super hard since middle school. But I think, as with any entrepreneur, when you have a hunch about something and it won't go away, I think it's something you need to invest in. And, I started a company. It was my dream company. I burnt out after 7-8 years, just kind of hard charging, and felt the pull to take time off. And the experience that I had and the stories of everyone that I heard and talked to after my sabbatical made me think, it's obvious that a vacation is great and a longer vacation is better, but something is happening in a much more kind of identity level transformation that needs to be discovered. And so I set out to bring some rigor to the topic, did an academic study around it, then that led to the interviews, which turned into the book. And so, one thing led to another, and I think the gold at the end of the rainbow here is so profound and important, I think, for how we work and how we live, that I thought it was worth dedicating a chapter of my life to. So here we are.
So last week, I took a little vacation. My husband and I actually went on a rafting trip in Utah for several days, and there was absolutely no cell phone coverage the entire time, which was that was a vacation all by itself, even without the beautiful scenery and the rafting. But it was interesting because there were kids there who had to be without their phones for several days. There were retirees there. There were families there with us. And it got me thinking about age and how this works. Because it wasn't a sabbatical. It wasn't for months. It was 4 days. But it does. Your brain does start to kind of disconnect and think about different things. And I wondered, how does age fit into this? Is there a too young or too old age to take a sabbatical?
It's funny. In my book, I talk about kind of inflection points in your life for taking a sabbatical, from gap year all the way to twilight career, where you're trying to think about how you spend, your final chapter before retirement. But when I first started the research, I was pretty dogmatic. I saw myself as mid-30s at the time, and I figured that you needed to work a certain amount of time before you even burnt out. And so why would I interview younger people? But I kept hearing the same story around, gap year and early 20s, and realizing that the experience of being young and getting into the workforce is so much different than when I was a kid. And so these folks are charging for a decade before they even start their first job, right? And so it really expanded the aperture on what I considered a sabbatical. And the gap year chapter is one I'm most proud of. And so, no, I think that at every age, people think that they're living in the most important era in their life, and they couldn't possibly set things aside and take a few months off. And yet, everyone I've talked to, looking back, says, "Oh man, I wish I would have done it sooner." I'm really trying to get in front of that and give people this inspiration and permission at various waypoints in their life to take time off before it's too late.
How long do you think it takes, once you do start taking time off, for your mind to really unplug and start to think of things that you wouldn't be able to when you're stuck in your routine?
People aren't going to like this answer, but the most often thing that I hear is 6 to 8 weeks. So really feeling like you are not your work self, you have that mask off, you aren't thinking about your calendar, your body and mind have started to heal. You've engaged in some sort of deep work or activity that's not just glancing on the surface, going parasailing on vacation. And so that's typically what we see. Now, to your earlier question about how does a negative introduction into a sabbatical change that, if you wait until some traumatic event happens, it takes you longer to detox and heal at the beginning. It's like you've pulled the ejection, you're like pull the ejection chute. And so if you have a company-sponsored sabbatical, you don't have to worry about money or health insurance. You knew it, years in advance. You could plan for it. I think you can actually get away with a much more condensed sabbatical. And that's what I want folks to do is plan like 4 or 5 years ahead, instead of saying, which I'm sure many of your listeners will, it's like, well, I can't possibly take 3 months off now. Like, of course you couldn't, right?
But you could say, in 3 years or in 4 years, I'm going to take 3 months off.
Yeah, my rallying cry is, what are you doing the summer of 2031? Almost no one knows, right? And so summer 2031, we're going to do it. We're setting a stake in the stand. We're going to tell our employers. We can plan around it. We can save money up for it. That's the kind of, I think, time frame you need to be thinking of to make it more possible for a greater swath of people.
And when you're making that case for summer 2031 to your employer, is there an economic benefit that can be measured that you can say, by the way, if you give me this, it's likely that I'm going to be a much better employee when I come back?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I would say is just for most employers, by saying I will be there in 5 years is huge. I know in Silicon Valley the average tenure is 2.5 years or less at a lot of these companies. And so by saying like I'm committed to this company, I just want to take a few months off with my family 5 years from now. I think if a company were to not allow that, it's not a great sign in general about how they kind of picture you. Warren Buffett has an expression where it's time is the friend of the great company and the enemy of the mediocre. So I think this notion of if you can plan from medium-term perspective to distribute your responsibilities to other employees, pick them back up when you get back, give junior employees a stretch experience, test the resilience of the company, because people are going to leave anyway. People quit, people go on parental leave. That's the muscle that you need to build as a successful company. And also create some loyalty and kind of commitment for those people, because they know that the company has seen them as a whole person as opposed to just a worker bee.
What happens when people come back from sabbaticals? Are they different people? Because I remember, not necessarily sabbatical, but I remember people that I've known who've gone on these fellowships as journalists, and then they come back and they really don't want to do their job anymore because they just had this like totally different experience. Yeah.
I think, listen, it's a choose your own adventure type situation. I think there's some folks, there are great stories in the book where someone goes off, I'm thinking of a economist from the U.S. Treasury where they get this leave without pay, every 7 years. She went off, backpacking in Latin America, which was her dream. She spent time taking care of an ailing loved one, which was a surprise. And, in Latin America, she was like, I care a lot about the work that I do, and work gives me meaning and fulfillment. And now I know that I have a light at the end of the tunnel every 7 years or so to invest in myself a little bit more. She was happy to go back, right? Whereas other folks, might have been at a job too long, or they might find out something about themselves that makes them want to make a big change. But I think if we view it as like a periodic oil change or, teeth cleaning, where it's like you're checking up on yourself and making sure you're heading in the right direction and that you're healthy and thriving, then there's less of these surprise, pull the chute, I need to throw everything off the table and change my life completely, which I think is probably healthier.
You talked about parental leave, and I wonder how our politics play into this. You don't hear politicians on either side of the political spectrum talking about the need for people to be taking sabbaticals. Why
Not
is
yet.
that? Or is that going to be necessary to have it be something that's really common and widespread in America?
Yeah. I mean, I think we have to put it in perspective that the weekend, the concept of the weekend is 100 years old. And it was founded by mill workers in the Northeast, right? And, the first sabbatical policy was 1890. So it's earlier than that.
At Harvard, right?
Yeah. And parental leave is, less than 40 years old in the States. And so, what we saw during the pandemic, one of the silver linings is that we realized that we could work in a very different way. We didn't come to that conclusion voluntarily. It was thrust upon us, and we said, you know what? For the knowledge workers that had the fortune to be able to work in this way, we actually had the technology to get a bunch of work done in different environments and in a very different way. And so we can either be thrust into it from an emergency standpoint, like 2020. We can build it up slowly, like parental leave, where, I think just slowly people realize that this is an important human event. And even if you don't want to have kids, everyone here was a baby, right? I think. And so we're going to make space and time for that to happen. I think the same with sabbaticals. So from the top down, it's about having executives and people in positions of power to make change have a personal experience themselves that makes them want to create an enabling policy in the organization. And then grassroots from the ground up, sharing your story if you've taken a sabbatical, which gives people permission to do so themselves. And I think that's how movements start. So, the last thing I'd say about it is, as we think about this kind of productivity boom with AI, do you want to give that extra productivity to producing more, or do you want to try to create some space for leisure, which is what we've been saying we wanted to do for 100 years? Like every time we reach a new kind of level of productivity, we assume that the work week is going to shrink to 5 hours, and that's not what happens.
I mean, I'm still surprised that after COVID-19 when everybody went into remote work, and we saw in many cases that people could be more productive or as productive working remotely as they were in the office, that we are still moving back like almost 100% to people being in the office because that's what the companies want now. And also there are so many other pieces of that. It's like commercial real estate in cities, and if there's nobody in the offices, then how are the local restaurants going to survive? But still, it's kind of surprising to me that after that experience that we all went through, that we seem to be going back to the old way.
I think that we have to separate out the narrative from the actuality. I think the narrative right now has swung, right? The Great Resignation, the narrative swung towards empowerment of workers. Now it's swinging the other direction because people are scared about the impact of AI. I think if you look at the number of people who are able to work remotely in 2018 versus now, I think it's astronomically higher. And like flexibility, what you can ask for when you get a job. And so, there might have been an overcorrection, but I think if you look at the kind of arc of history on that, it's heading in the right direction, similar to parental leave, and that's where we're heading with sabbaticals, I hope.
So what would your advice be to one of our listeners who's now listening to this and saying, okay, I'm going to do it, summer 2031, what should I do?
You already accomplished the first thing, which is make sure you're not allowing your kind of fears around the near-term uncertainty to interrupt that plan, which is start planning 5 years in advance or some amount of time in advance so that you can save up, you can get the logistics in order. The other thing is I would go to a cafe, take a journal, no music, no friends, no family, and try to make this concept of a sabbatical concrete for you. Sabbatical is a big fancy word, but what is the thing that you would want to do? You'd want to tell your grandkids, on your knees, you would want to do before you died, that is really important that you have not made time for. And once you can actually distill that down to a thing that's important to you as a person, then the idea kind of has space to root into your mind and say, wait a minute, like, why would I not do this? Why would I leave it to chance whether or not I can do this in retirement, if at all? And so I think having a tangible idea, setting the clock into the future, and then finding an exemplar, finding someone in your life at work, among your community that has taken one to start giving you permission. If you don't have anyone, we created this organization, the Sabbatical Project, where you can hear about people's stories and give yourself inspiration, and then start saving and start planning.
When's your next sabbatical?
You caught me in a falsehood. It was 9 years ago. I just had a kid. We just had our first kid, so it's not in the near term future, but I know that it's coming and that it's important to me. So you'll have to check back with me on that.
All right. That is DJ DiDonna, senior lecturer at Harvard Business School, author of Big Time Off, The Transformative Power of Sabbaticals and How to Take One. DJ, thank you so much for joining us.
Awesome to be here, Jeremy.
And thanks for listening to the show. It was produced by Harrison Patino. We're going to be back in just a few days with an economic check-in. We're going to be asking you what extra expense is worth it right now and what is getting cut as high prices just proliferate across the economy. Join us, follow us so you don't miss an episode. I'm Jeremy Hobson. I will talk to you soon.